Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. Update 45 is introducing 11 new sets. I did go over all of them in my patch note review. The sets talk starts just before the 29-minute mark, so make sure to check that out for an in-depth look at all of them. But today I wanted to focus on the 4 being introduced with the 2 new dungeons that are applicable for PvE DPS. We have Vandorallen's Resonance, which is a light set, Jerensi's Bladestorm, and Noxious Boulder, which are medium sets, and Orpheon the Tactician, which is a monster set. So to help make comparisons, I took a common set that many of us already are familiar with, Pillar of Nirn. So I used the base tooltips for all of these with just 1k weapon and spell damage that your character starts with. So Pillar of Nirn at these base stats does 3208 total damage over 10 seconds, which puts it at about 321 DPS since it has a 10-second duration and a 10-second cooldown. Now, Pillar does have an upfront hit to it, and so I will be comparing these for shorter burst as well. So for the first 5 seconds, the DPS is slightly higher at 401. Now, I'm not using Pillar to say that these are all replacements for Pillar or they would be used in the same scenarios. It's just there as a familiar number, familiar amount of DPS that you'd get from a proc set to work with to compare to these other ones. So first up, let's look at Vandorallen's Resonance, the light set. Dealing damage with a fully charged heavy attack places an electric charge on yourself and below your enemy. After 1 second, both charges explode in a 4-meter blast, each dealing 914 shock damage to enemies hit. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds and scales off the higher of your weapon or spell damage. So if you are in melee range, you will get this 914 amount twice, meaning a hit of 1828 damage. So with that 6-second cooldown, this has 305 DPS. So while this isn't bad, it also isn't quite enough to be competitive, especially since it would require a fully charged heavy attack every 6 seconds. And if you are going the heavy attack build route, the damage from this simply won't hold up to your traditional heavy attack sets that are already being used. It is a fairly decent burst at that 1 second mark when it goes off after the end of your heavy attack, but doesn't seem like enough to really warrant PvE usage. Maybe they could add a line to this set at the end that says increases your damage done with heavy attacks to monsters by 10%. That might be enough to push it into a competitive area with the sustained damage from that percent bonus and then the nice upfront burst from the proc as well. As it is now though, I'm not too excited about this set. So next up we have the medium set Jerensi's Bladestorm. While in combat, casting an ability that leaves an effect on the ground creates a 6-meter spike vortex that deals 3855 physical damage over 5 seconds to enemies inside it. After 5 seconds, enemies within the vortex are dealt 1925 physical damage over 5 seconds. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. So it has more damage, it's front loaded in that first 5-second period, and then anything still in that vortex when that period ends will get the secondary 5-second dot, which is a little bit weaker. The tooltip value on this set is insanely good. Even accounting for the 5-second downtime between procs, it still has a base DPS of 385, and for short burst scenarios, it only gets better at 578 DPS for the first 10 seconds and 771 DPS for the first 5 seconds. And as I mentioned, this is because the damage from it is heavily front loaded. It's almost like a reverse Whirl of the Depths. The vortex is stationary, so definitely won't be a great option on enemies that move around a lot, but for those you can reliably get the hits off on, this will do really good damage. It's really just the 2 lines of penetration that are the main drawbacks, as these stats can be wasted in optimized scenarios such as organized trials or testing on the trial dummy, but for scenarios where the pin can be useful like dungeons or solo play, this set is really good. I tested it out a little in the new dungeons, didn't really do anything to optimize around this, but here I used it on one of the mini bosses paired with Onsul, and it did almost 10k DPS, which was about 13.3% of my total damage, so really respectable numbers here. I also tried it in some trash and it worked pretty well there too, did about 32k DPS on this pull, which was about 24% of my total damage. So for AoE short burst, I think this set could work really well. However, if the ads are alive long enough for Azurblight to kick in, that's still going to definitely be the go-to for AoE scenarios. One thing worth noting, you can front bar the set even if you don't have a ground skill on your front bar. You just need to cast it from your back bar and bar swap quickly enough after casting so that it lands while you're on your front bar and it will still trigger the set. So overall, I'd probably put this set in the A tier. It's not quite S tier simply due to the 2 penetration lines making it a little bit less versatile than some of the other options. It would be really nice if we could get one of those changed over to some crit, but a very good set nonetheless, and I see this one being useful in a lot of scenarios. Next up, we have the other medium set, Noxious Boulder. Dealing damage with a fully charged heavy attack creates a 3-meter poison boulder. After 1.2 seconds, the boulder rolls forward, dealing 1049 poison damage to the first enemy hit, and creating a 6-meter pool of poison for 5 seconds, dealing 730 poison damage and applying the poison status effect each second to enemies inside. This effect can occur once every 20 seconds. So this does have a long cooldown in relation to that 5-second duration that the damage lasts, but holy crap, do those first 5 seconds hit hard. Hard enough that even with 15 seconds downtime, you would still average about 372 base DPS with this if you factor in the poison damage. Now, the downside is it does require a heavy attack to trigger, but it's only once every 20 seconds instead of every 6 seconds like the other set we went over. So for a standard light attack build, I don't see this one winning out over the other options for a sustained fight, but maybe for short burst it could, even on a light attack build. But for heavy attack builds, this seems like it could be a pretty competitive option all around. I do think it will be slightly behind other traditional heavy attack set options that you'd pair with Sergeant's Mail for longer encounters, but for short burst, this is probably now best in slot for heavy attack builds. If you look at the first 10 seconds of DPS and the first 5 seconds of DPS, it's going to be hard to find another set that can compete with this. And since it would only be slightly behind even for long sustained damage, this might just be the best one to run now. The poison pull it lays down on the ground is crazy good, and the nice thing is that the boulder stops at the first enemy hit, so you just have to make sure that you are heavy attacking at something in the center of the pack. I also tested this one out on some trash packs paired with the Sulxon set, and it did very nice damage. I was on a regular Arcanist build, not normally doing heavy attacks, but I would just do the one heavy attack before one of my flails to get this set going. So it did 26% of my damage here, and then on this next one, it did about 23% of my damage in this pool. I do think it would be nice if it could also trigger from a bash to make it play a little more nicely with light attack builds, but I think I'll give this one an A as well if you are doing a heavy attack build. Probably a B if you're not. One thing I'm really interested to see though is how this does on a Dragonite. Dragonites get more poison and poisoned status effect damage, so I could see this one being really nice on the DK. Alright, then finally we have the monster set, Orpheon the Tactician. While in combat, casting an ability that leaves an effect on the ground summons a tentacle at the target's location. After 2 seconds, the tentacle swings wildly in a 5-meter radius, dealing 229 physical damage and stunning up to 6 enemies for 3 seconds. Enemies immune to stun take 1429 physical damage instead. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds. I do really like the varying levels of damage based on if an enemy can be stunned or not. This is the type of PvE, PvP balance I've been pushing for a while, as many sets that have the stun condition simply end up useless in PvE because of the power budget being taken up by that stun. So having that varying condition here is really nice. The base DPS on this set is 179 and the upfront 5-second DPS is 285. This is decent, however, it won't compete with something like Selene for single target damage, especially since you have to continually put a ground ability down every 8 seconds to trigger it. And then for AoE damage, Prior Theeric seems like it would just be a better option, as the base DPS is only slightly lower, but that initial burst DPS is almost the same and you get the 5% AoE damage on top of it. So as it is currently, I don't think this one is going to be a very popular option for PvE. Maybe if they added a secondary effect or debuff to the tentacles, it would be a bit more appealing. It does have a 2-second window before it even hits, so I feel like that is pretty easy to avoid in PvP. So I think it could pack a bit more of a punch and not be overtuned there. Overall, pretty nice to get 2 solid DPS sets. I think with some tweaks, we could be getting 4 good DPS sets, which would be outstanding to see in a dungeon DLC. So hopefully they can make some adjustments to the 2 that were underperforming a little bit. Sadly, all of the support options also seem to be underperforming. I did go over those in detail in my patch note review if you want to check those out too. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you all think about the new sets. Big thanks to those that have supported with Patreon and YouTube memberships. And a special thanks to these folks here. I really couldn't keep doing this without you. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.